The air smelled of expensive perfume, fresh flowers, and old money. And in the middle of all that wealth stood me, Nathan Cole, a man who had spent nearly 10 years chasing an idea most people believed would never work. I wasn't broke. I wasn't unemployed. I wasn't irresponsible. But compared to everyone surrounding us that evening, I looked like a failure. At least that's what they saw. They didn't see the thousands of hours I had spent inside workshops. They didn't see the prototypes. They didn't see the failed experiments. They didn't see the communities I dreamed of helping. They only saw a man in his mid-30s who still hadn't become everything he promised he would become. And unfortunately, my wife had started seeing me the same way. Rebecca stood beside me wearing a stunning red evening dress. Heads turned whenever she entered a room. Confident, intelligent, beautiful. The kind of woman who could command attention without even trying. Years earlier, she had been my biggest supporter. Back when my dream was still exciting. Back when sacrifice felt temporary. Back when we both believed success was right around the corner. But dreams age differently than people. And after enough years pass, excitement can slowly become exhaustion. I noticed it happening little by little. The conversations became shorter. The smiles became less frequent. The questions became sharper. How much longer? When will it start making money? How many more years are we supposed to wait? Questions I never seemed able to answer. Not because I didn't want to, because I honestly didn't know. Building something meaningful rarely comes with a schedule. Unfortunately, bills do. Rebecca had spent years watching friends move forward. They bought larger homes. They traveled. They started families. They built comfortable lives. Meanwhile, I spent evenings staring at engineering diagrams and prototype designs. Every spare dollar went back into research. Every setback required more time, more money, more patience. The one thing Rebecca was rapidly running out of. That evening began like dozens before it, with forced smiles, polite conversations, and invisible tension. How's the company going, Nathan? The question came from a private equity executive standing near the fountain. His smile looked friendly. His eyes didn't. I recognized the expression immediately. People always ask about your dreams when they secretly expect them to fail. It's progressing, I said. He nodded. The way people nod when they don't believe a word you've said. Still working on those filtration systems? Yes. 10 years now, isn't it? A few people nearby chuckled. Not loudly, just enough. I smiled politely. Something like that. He lifted his glass. Persistence is admirable. Translation. You should have quit years ago. The group moved on. I pretended not to care. Rebecca didn't. I saw the embarrassment flash across her face. It lasted only a second. But it was there. The same look I had noticed more frequently during the previous year. The look that said she was tired of defending me. Tired of explaining me. Tired of believing in something nobody else believed in. The evening continued. More conversations. More subtle judgments. More reminders that I wasn't where people expected me to be. Then came the final straw. We joined a table occupied by several successful entrepreneurs. One of them had recently sold his company for nearly $80 million. Another had just purchased a vacation property in Aspen. The discussion naturally shifted toward investments and growth. Eventually, someone asked what I was working on. I explained the clean water technology, the low-cost filtration system, the goal of helping underserved communities, the years of testing, the progress, the vision. When I finished, there was silence. Not thoughtful silence, awkward silence. Then one man laughed. Actually laughed. That's still going on. The table erupted into uncomfortable chuckles. I felt Rebecca stiffen beside me. I thought that project died years ago. It almost did, I replied calmly. Another man shook his head. You're a brave guy. There it was again. That word. Brave. People only call you brave when they think you're losing. Nobody calls a successful person brave. They call them smart, visionary, brilliant. Brave is what they call someone whose dream hasn't worked yet. Rebecca suddenly stood. Nathan. Her voice sounded different. Dangerously different. I turned toward her. Her eyes were glossy. Not with sadness. With years of frustration finally reaching their limit. Rebecca. No. She shook her head. No, let's be honest for once. The table fell silent. People sensed something was happening. Conversations nearby began slowing. Heads turned. My stomach tightened. Rebecca. Not here. Then where? She asked. When exactly are we supposed to have this conversation? Every eye in the courtyard seemed fixed on us. Comma. The ocean breeze moved through the estate. Nobody spoke. Nobody moved. For the first time all evening, nobody cared about business. They cared about the unfolding disaster. Rebecca laughed. Comma. A short, bitter laugh. 10 years, Nathan. I remained silent. 10 years of promises. Her voice cracked. 10 years of believing. I felt my chest tighten. 10 years of hearing that success is just around the corner. The courtyard had become completely silent. Then she reached for her left hand. Time seemed to slow. I knew exactly what she was doing, and somehow I couldn't stop it. The silver wedding ring slid from her finger. The same ring I had placed there 11 years earlier. The same ring that represented every promise we'd ever made. Tears formed in her eyes, but her voice remained steady. I'm tired. My heart sank. I'm tired of waiting. The ring rested in her palm. I'm tired of defending a future that never arrives. Then she looked directly at me. The anger. The disappointment. The heartbreak. Years of it. All visible at once. And then she said the words I would never forget. You are good for nothing. Gasps echoed throughout the courtyard. Before I could respond, Rebecca threw the ring. The silver band struck the stone pavement, bounced once, twice, 3 times, then rolled across the courtyard. Nobody moved. Nobody breathed. I stared at the ring, not because of the metal, because of what it represented. 11 years, gone in a single moment. And for the first time in my life, I had absolutely no idea what to say. 3 days after Rebecca threw her wedding ring across the courtyard of the Hawthorne estate, our marriage officially ended. Not through lawyers, not through screaming, not through dramatic confrontations, just silence. The kind of silence that appears when 2 people have exhausted every argument they know how to make. She packed her belongings while I sat in my workshop. Neither of us cried. That was probably the saddest part. The tears had already happened months earlier. What remained was exhaustion. When she finally carried the last box to her car, she paused at the driveway. For a moment I thought she might say something. Maybe goodbye. Comma. Maybe good luck. Maybe one final attempt to save what was left. Instead, she simply nodded. Then she drove away. And 11 years disappeared behind a pair of red taillights. The house felt different immediately. Bigger. Colder. Quieter. I walked through empty rooms that night and realized something terrifying. For years, I had been so focused on my mission that I never imagined life without Rebecca. Every plan I had ever created included her. Every future I imagined included her. Now she was gone, and I had no idea what came next. The following weeks were brutal. People often assume heartbreak arrives all at once. It doesn't. It arrives in waves. You feel normal while making coffee? Then suddenly remember there is no second mug to fill. You walk into a grocery store and instinctively reach for something they like. Then remember they aren't there. You hear a joke and almost send it to them. Then remember there is nobody to send it to anymore. Those moments hurt far more than the actual breakup, because they remind you how deeply someone became part of your daily life. I stopped attending social events. Stopped answering most phone calls. Stopped caring about what anyone thought. The only thing I continued doing was working. My clean water project had become the last meaningful thing left in my life. So I buried myself inside it. 12-hour days became 14. 14 became 16. I stopped tracking weekends. Stopped tracking holidays. My workshop became my entire world. Months passed. Then something happened. I ran out of money. Comma. Again. The prototype I had spent nearly a year developing failed during testing. A pressure valve cracked. The filtration chamber collapsed. Weeks of work vanished in seconds. I sat alone staring at broken components scattered across my workbench. For the first time in years, I seriously considered quitting. Not taking a break. Not slowing down. Quitting. Completely. Maybe Rebecca had been right. Maybe everyone had been right. Maybe some dreams simply weren't meant to happen. I spent nearly an hour sitting in silence. Then my phone rang. Marcus Bennett. My oldest friend. I almost ignored it. Instead, I answered. Hello? You sound terrible. I feel terrible. Good. I frowned. What? If you sounded great, I'd be worried. I laughed despite myself. Marcus had a talent for doing that, making impossible situations feel slightly less impossible. What happened? he asked. The prototype failed. Again? Again. A pause. Then he asked the question I hated most. You quitting? I stared at the broken equipment. For several seconds I said nothing. That silence answered for me. Marcus sighed. Listen carefully. I'm listening. No, you're not. I smiled weakly. He continued. Nathan. Do you know how many times people told Thomas Edison he was wasting his life? Marcus. No. Answer. I don't know. Neither do I. He laughed. My point is nobody remembers the failures after something works. I rubbed my forehead. Maybe that's because most things never work. Maybe. The honesty surprised me. Then he added, but you've never been most people. That conversation lasted nearly 2 hours, and by the time it ended, I wasn't ready to quit anymore. Not yet. The next morning, I returned to work. 6 months later, another investor rejected me. Then another. Then another. 32 presentations. 32 rejections. Some were polite. Some weren't. One investor actually laughed during my presentation. Another interrupted halfway through. You have passion, Nathan. I already knew what came next. People always begin bad news with compliments. But passion isn't a business model. I thanked him for his time, then left. By then I had heard every possible version of no. Too risky. Too early. Too ambitious. Too complicated. Too expensive. Not scalable. No market demand. Wrong timing. Wrong strategy. Wrong industry. Wrong everything. Yet despite all that, something strange started happening. Small communities began using my technology. Not many, just a few. A farming town in Kansas. A remote community in Arizona. A small district in New Mexico. The systems worked. Actually worked. Families gained access to cleaner water. Maintenance costs dropped. Health reports improved. For the first time I wasn't imagining impact. I was seeing it. That changed everything, because success stopped being theoretical. It became real. One afternoon I received a call from a town administrator in Arizona. You don't know me, he said. No, sir, but I wanted to thank you. For what? My granddaughter can drink from our taps again. I froze. The man continued. Our old system failed years ago. His voice cracked slightly. People like you don't realize what these inventions mean to communities like ours. After the call ended, I sat alone in my office. For several minutes I couldn't move, because for the first time, someone's life had improved because I refused to quit. Not because I became rich, not because I became famous, because I stayed. That realization carried me through the next year. Then came the email. At first I almost deleted it. The sender was unfamiliar. The subject line sounded generic, but something made me open it. I read the message once, then twice. Then a third time. My hands started shaking. The email came from Global Water Alliance, one of the largest humanitarian organizations in the world. They had been monitoring clean water innovations across North America. Someone had recommended my work. They wanted a meeting. I honestly thought it was fake. After years of rejection, hope felt suspicious. Still, I replied. 2 weeks later, I found myself sitting inside a conference room overlooking Manhattan. 5 executives occupied the opposite side of the table. For nearly 3 hours they questioned me. The technology, the costs, the scalability, the implementation process, every weakness, every risk, every challenge. When the meeting ended I felt exhausted and completely convinced I had failed. 3 days later my phone rang. I recognized the number immediately. My heart pounded. Hello? A woman's voice responded. Mr. Cole. Yes. This is Global Water Alliance. I stood, suddenly unable to sit still. We've completed our evaluation. I waited. The next few seconds felt like hours. Then she said, we would like to move forward. I closed my eyes, unable to speak. We believe your technology has the potential to help millions of people. Millions. The word echoed inside my head. Not thousands, not hundreds. Millions. After the call ended, I contacted Marcus immediately. He answered on the first ring. What happened? We got it. Silence. Then. No. Yes. Another pause. Then I heard him shouting. Actually shouting. I laughed harder than I had laughed in years. Because for the first time, The dream wasn't surviving anymore. The dream was growing fast. Faster than anything I had imagined. And 6 months later, when the first national deployment reports arrived, I stared at the numbers on my screen in disbelief. Then I checked them again. And again. Because there was no way they could be correct. Yet they were. The technology had reached more communities in 6 months than I had expected in 5 years. Demand was exploding. Partnership requests were arriving daily. Universities wanted research access. Government agencies wanted meetings. And for the first time in my entire life, the world was finally paying attention. But I had no idea that someone else was about to notice too. Someone who hadn't spoken to me in nearly 3 years. Someone whose face I still remembered every time I looked at an empty spot on my finger. Rebecca. And when she finally saw what was happening, everything would change. The first time I saw my company mentioned on national television, I almost missed it. The television mounted on the wall of my office wasn't even there for entertainment. It had been installed for presentations and video conferences. That afternoon, I was reviewing deployment reports from Colorado, when one of my employees knocked on the door. Nathan. I looked up. She was smiling. Actually smiling. What happened? Without saying a word, she pointed toward the television. I turned. A business news segment was airing. The host was discussing emerging American companies creating real-world impact. At first, I didn't pay much attention. Then I heard my name. I nearly dropped the report in my hand. Nathan Cole's water filtration. Technology is now operating in over 200 communities across the country. The screen displayed images of families using systems my team had built. Schools, hospitals, small towns, places that had struggled for years. For a moment I couldn't move, not because I was proud, because I was overwhelmed. For more than a decade nobody cared. Nobody listened. Nobody believed. Now suddenly millions of people were hearing about work that had once existed only inside a cramped workshop. The segment lasted less than 4 minutes, but when it ended the room erupted. Employees applauded. Several people cheered. One engineer actually wiped away tears. I smiled, then quietly returned to my desk. Because despite everything happening around me, I still felt like the same man who spent years fixing broken prototypes alone at midnight. Success hadn't changed that. If anything, it made me more grateful. Over the following months, growth accelerated beyond anything I had imagined. New partnerships arrived weekly. Universities requested research collaborations. Several states launched pilot programs using our technology. Revenue increased, then increased again, then doubled once more. The numbers stopped feeling real. Every morning I expected to wake up and discover it had all been a dream. Instead, reality kept getting bigger. One afternoon, Marcus walked into my office carrying a newspaper. He tossed it onto my desk. I looked down. There was a photo of me on the front page of the business section. I groaned. Marcus laughed. Normal people frame those. I hate photographs. You hate attention. Same thing. He sat across from me. For a moment, neither of us spoke. Then he smiled. You know what's funny? What? 3 years ago, people were asking when you were finally going to quit. I laughed. Yeah. Now they're asking how they can invest. That was the strange thing about success. The work didn't change. The person didn't change. Only people's perception changed. The same idea that once sounded ridiculous suddenly sounded brilliant. The same man once called unrealistic suddenly became visionary. I learned something important during that period. Most people don't judge reality. They judge momentum. They don't ask where you're going. They ask where it looks like you're going. And once the world decides you're winning, everyone wants a front row seat. Around that time, invitations started arriving. Business conferences, innovation summits, industry panels, leadership events. At first I declined most of them. Public speaking had never interested me. But eventually I accepted a few. One event led to another, then another. Before long, I found myself sitting across from television, hosts discussing entrepreneurship and innovation. The interviews were surprisingly simple. Everyone wanted to know the same thing. What kept you going? I always gave the same answer. Purpose. Not money, not recognition, purpose. Because there had been years when money didn't exist. Recognition certainly didn't exist, but purpose remained. and purpose is what survives when everything else disappears. One evening, after finishing an interview in Chicago, I returned to my hotel room and found hundreds of unread messages waiting on my phone. Most were congratulations. Some came from people I hadn't heard from in years. Former classmates, old neighbors, distant relatives, people who had completely disappeared during the difficult years. Now suddenly they remembered I existed. I responded to a few, ignored most, not out of bitterness, simply because I no longer needed validation. The people who mattered had already been there. Marcus, my team, the communities we served. Everyone else was background noise. Meanwhile, several states away, someone else was hearing my name more frequently. Rebecca. At first she ignored it. A passing mention from a colleague. A news article shared online. A podcast recommendation. Nothing that seemed important. After all, she had spent years hearing about my project. Why would this be different? So she continued living her life, building her career, focusing on her own goals. Until one evening changed everything. Rebecca was traveling for work. Her flight had been delayed. She found herself sitting inside an airport lounge waiting for a late departure. The lounge television happened to be tuned to a national business network. She wasn't really paying attention. Most travelers weren't. People stared at phones.com, laptops, coffee cups. Then the screen changed. A familiar face appeared. My face. At first she thought she was imagining it. Then the interviewer spoke, and joining us today is Nathan Cole, founder and CEO of Aquanova Systems. Rebecca reportedly froze. Completely. The coffee cup in her hand stopped halfway to her lips. For nearly 15 minutes she watched the interview. Every answer. Every question. Every statistic. Every achievement. Communities served. Partnerships formed. Lives improved. National expansion.com. Industry recognition. The man speaking on that screen was the same man she had once watched sketch designs at the kitchen table, the same man who spent weekends inside workshops, the same man she believed was chasing a dream that would never arrive. Except now the dream had arrived, and the entire country was watching. When the interview ended, she remained seated, staring at the blank screen, trying to understand what she had just witnessed. Not because of the money, not because of the success, because she suddenly realized something. Nathan hadn't changed. He had simply continued, long enough for the world to catch up. Over the following weeks, she saw my name everywhere. Articles, videos, podcasts, conference announcements, and every new appearance confirmed the same reality. The mission had worked. Against all odds, it had worked. Then came the phone call that changed my life once again. It arrived on a Tuesday morning. I almost ignored it because I was reviewing engineering reports. Fortunately, I answered. The woman on the other end introduced herself. She worked for Forbes. Initially, I assumed someone was playing a joke. Then she explained why she was calling. For months, their editorial team had been researching entrepreneurs creating measurable impact across America. They wanted to feature my story, not as a small article, as something much bigger. I thanked her politely, then spent the next hour convincing myself it wasn't real. Marcus laughed when I told him, "You know what's coming, right?" "No. You're about to become impossible to avoid." Unfortunately, he was right. The interviews intensified. The requests multiplied. The attention exploded. Yet through all of it, I remained focused on one thing. The mission, the communities, the technology. Everything else felt temporary. Then one morning, Forbes released its annual feature. The article went live shortly after sunrise. I was in the office before anyone else when Marcus burst through the door. He wasn't walking. He was practically running. "Nathan." I looked up. "What?" He tossed a magazine onto my desk. The cover slid across the surface. I stared at it. For several seconds I couldn't breathe, because there I was. My photograph. My name. My story. Printed on the cover. The headline celebrated innovators transforming lives through purpose-driven entrepreneurship. For a long moment, I simply stared, not at the photograph, at the journey behind it, the failures, the rejections, the heartbreak, the sacrifices, every painful step that had led to this moment. Outside my office, employees were cheering. Phones were ringing non-stop. Messages were flooding in. Across the country, people were sharing the article, reading the story, talking about the company. And somewhere looking at that same cover, Rebecca finally understood. The dream she once believed would never arrive had become larger than either of us could have imagined. And neither of us knew that fate was quietly arranging one final meeting. A meeting that would happen months later, not to reopen old wounds, but to finally bring peace to a chapter both of us had carried for years. The Forbes cover changed my life, but not in the way most people imagined. The money was nice, comma. The recognition was nice. The interviews, the conferences, the invitations from people who once ignored me, all of that was nice too. But none of those things brought me the greatest reward. The greatest reward was peace. For years I had lived with uncertainty. For years I had wondered whether all the sacrifices would mean anything. For years I had questioned myself every time a prototype failed, every time an investor rejected me, and every time someone told me my dream was unrealistic. Now, for the first time in a very long time, those questions were gone. I no longer needed proof. I no longer needed approval. I no longer needed anyone to tell me I was enough. I already knew. 3 months after the Forbes article was released, I was invited to speak at the National Innovation Summit in Washington, D.C. More than 4,000 people attended. Entrepreneurs, students, investors, engineers, business leaders, people from all over the country. As I waited backstage reviewing my notes, an event coordinator approached me. "Mr. Cole, someone would like to see you before your presentation." I assumed it was another reporter. Instead, when I turned around, I saw Rebecca. For a moment, neither of us spoke. Years had passed since the night she threw her wedding ring across the courtyard. Years since our marriage ended. Years since we had gone our separate ways. She smiled first. "Hi, Nathan." I smiled back. "Hi, Rebecca." There was no anger between us, no resentment, no bitterness, just two people who had once shared a life together. "You've done well," she said. "Thank you." She laughed softly. "That's probably the understatement of the century." I smiled. She looked at me for a moment before continuing. "You know, when I saw your face on Forbes, I didn't feel jealous." I remained silent. I felt proud. The honesty in her voice surprised me. "I mean it," she continued. "I was sitting in an airport when your interview appeared on television. I watched the entire thing." I laughed. "I've heard that interview wasn't bad." "It wasn't." Her eyes became thoughtful. "The thing that impressed me wasn't your success." "What was it?" "The fact that you never gave up." For a moment, neither of us spoke. Then she shook her head. "I spent years believing you were chasing something impossible." I nodded. "I know. And I was wrong." The words were simple, but they carried weight. Not because I needed to hear them, because they were sincere. She wasn't apologizing to get something. She wasn't trying to come back. She wasn't asking for another chance. She was simply acknowledging the truth. "You became exactly who you said you would become," she said. I smiled. "Not exactly." She raised an eyebrow. "No." I shook my head. "I became someone stronger." That made her smile. "I believe that." A few moments later, she extended her hand. "Congratulations, Nathan." I shook it. "Thank you, Rebecca." She nodded. "I'm genuinely happy for you. And I'm happy you're doing well too." For the first time, her smile reached her eyes. Then she stepped back. "No regrets today." I looked at her. "None." She thought for a second. Then she answered honestly. "Only one." "What is it?" I wish I had understood sooner that some dreams take longer than others. I nodded. "That's a lesson most people learn too late." She smiled one last time. Then she walked away. And that was it. No dramatic ending. No reunion. No second chance. Just respect. Just closure. Just two people finally understanding each other. A few minutes later, I walked onto the stage. Thousands of people filled the auditorium. The applause echoed through the room. As I stood behind the podium, I looked across the audience and thought about the journey, the failures, the sacrifices, the lonely nights, the doubts, the setbacks. Every painful moment had helped shape the person standing there. Then I began speaking. "People think success changes your life." The room became quiet. "But success is not what changes your life." I paused. "Persistence changes your life." The audience listened carefully. Most people quit when progress becomes invisible. Most people stop when results take too long. Most people abandon their dreams because they expect certainty before they continue. I looked around the room. But certainty comes after commitment, not before it. Several people nodded. I continued. If there is one lesson my journey has taught me, it is this: never allow another person's opinion to define your future. The room remained silent. People can only judge what they see today. They cannot see what you might become tomorrow. I paused again. Sometimes the difference between failure and success is simply staying in the game longer than everyone expects. The audience erupted into applause. As I stood there, I realized something important. The greatest achievement of my life was never appearing on the Forbes list. It was becoming the kind of person who refused to quit when quitting would have been easier, because money fades, fame fades, recognition fades, but character remains. And in the end, the most valuable thing you build is not a company, it's yourself. This story teaches that success is rarely instant and that meaningful goals often require years of patience, sacrifice, and resilience. Nathan's journey shows the importance of staying committed to a purpose even when others doubt you. It also reminds us not to judge people based on their current circumstances, because potential is often invisible. The story encourages perseverance, self-belief, emotional maturity, and the understanding that true success is measured by impact, growth, and character.